students, welcome to Sunil's tutorial. I am Sunil Melwani and today we will be doing this chapter called as circulation. Let's see this. Let's see double circulation in human. Now, first of all, what do we understand by double circulation? Now, when you talk about double circulation, it is the circulation of blood in through two circuits, right? You have circulation of blood through two circuits. One is called as systemic circuit. And I'll just show you this. So, one is called as systemic circuit and one is called as pulmonary circuit. Fine, do we get this thing here? So, let's show you this. Now this is what we call as double circulatory system. In double circulatory system, as you can see, you have circulation of blood in two circuits. One is called as the systemic circuit and the other is called as the pulmonary circuit. Right? Now, which prevents the mixing. Why do we need to have two circuits? So as to prevent the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the heart. What is the systemic circuit? Systemic circuit, pure blood from the left ventricle, here it is, pure blood from the left ventricle is transported to different parts of the body through the aorta, right? Now, the deoxygenated blood from the body is transported back to the right auricle, is transported back by the veins to the right auricles, right auricle of the heart. Now this particular circuit is called as the systemic circuit. You have another circuit, that is the pulmonary circuit. Now the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle is transported to the lungs by the pulmonary artery for purification, and the purified blood from the lungs is brought into the left auricle by the pulmonary veins. This is called as the pulmonary circuit. Fine. So thus you have this double circulation in human. So do we understand what is double circulation in human and why do we need to have double circulation? One which would carry the blood throughout the body and the other which will carry the blood for purification to lungs. Right? Right. Double circulation is the circulation of blood double circulation is the circulation of blood in two circuits, right? That is systemic circuit and pulmonary circuit. And pulmonary circulation. You have two different types of circulation, right? Which prevent the mixing, mixing up of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood which prevent the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the heart. Fine. Now, what is the systemic circulation? What is the systemic circulation? Pure blood from left ventricle pure blood from left ventricle is transported to different parts of the body. Different parts of the body through aorta. Right? So that's your pure blood from left ventricle through aorta goes to the body. The deoxygenated blood from different parts of the body is collected back by the veins to the right auricle of the heart. Right? This circuit is called a systemic circuit. This circuit is systemic circulation. Fine. Now let's see what is pulmonary circulation. What is pulmonary circulation? Deoxygenated blood from the right ventricles is transported to the lungs. By the pulmonary artery. For purification. Right? The purified blood from the lungs is brought back. Purified blood from the lungs is brought back. Purified blood from the lungs is brought back to the left auricle. By means of pulmonary veins. Fine. This circuit is called as pulmonary circulation. This circuit is called pulmonary circulation. Fine. So now do we understand what is double circulation in the heart? Once you know what is double circulation in the heart, let's try to see the human heart. Human heart. It is a muscular organ made up of cardiac muscles. It is a muscular organ made up of cardiac muscles. Right, cardiac muscles which are involuntary. right? It is red, conical in shape, and is placed in the thoracic cavity in between the two lungs. It is red, conical in shape, It is red, conical in shape, and placed in the thoracic cavity in between the two lungs. Right? The conical apex of the heart is directed posteriorly while the broad base is anterior. The conical apex of the heart is directed posteriorly while the broad base anteriorly. Fine. The heart is covered by a double membrane called as pericardium with pericardial fluid in between them. Heart is covered by double membrane called pericardium with pericardial fluid in between them. Right? The pericardial fluids and the rib protect the heart from mechanical shocks and bring about free movement of the heart. I can say that the pericardial fluid and the ribs protect the heart. Ribs protect the heart from the mechanical shocks and bring about free movement of the heart. Bring about free movement of heart. Fine, do we get this in here? So this is your human heart. Next, let's try to see the external view of the heart. External view of heart, human heart. Now, the human heart is myogenic. What do you mean by the human heart is myogenic? That means that the human heartbeat is initiated within the heart muscles and does not depend upon the stimulus such as nerve fibers. Myogenic means the heartbeat is initiated within heart muscles and it does not depend upon outside stimulus such as nerve fibers. Right? The heart has its own rhythm to contract and relax. Heart has its own rhythm to contract and relax. Right? Detached mammalian heart placed in well oxygenated salt solution at 37 degrees Celsius can continue to beat rhythmically for a considerable time without any stimulus from the nervous system or hormones. A detached mammalian heart placed in a well oxygenated salt solution at 37 degrees Celsius can continue to beat rhythmically for a considerable amount of time without any stimulus from nervous system, or hormones. Finally, this in here. Now, the heart with dorsal and ventral views. Let's see the dorsal and ventral view and see what can we see in the human heart. First, let's see the ventral view. Just write that down first. Ventral view of human heart. Let's see the ventral view of the human heart. This is the ventral view of the human heart. Now let's try to understand this, guys. Now, the human heart has 4 chambers, 2 small thin-walled chambers called as arteria or the auricles. Here you have the 2 auricles, and 2 large thick-walled chambers called as the ventricles. These are your ventricles, right? Now, in between the 2 atria lies the pulmonary artery. Here is your pulmonary artery coming out from here, right? Lies the pulmonary aorta, sorry, not artery, pulmonary aorta, which rises from the left ventricle. The pulmonary aorta bifurcates into 2 pulmonary arteries. Here you have the pulmonary aorta, which bifurcates into 2 pulmonary arteries, which to carry the pulmonary aorta bifurcates into two pulmonary arteries to carry deoxygenated blood from right ventricle to the right and the left lungs. Now, from the left ventricle arises the aorta. From the left ventricle, here you have the left ventricle from where you will have aorta coming out, right? Now, from the left ventricle arises the aorta, which runs anteriorly and turns posteriorly to supply oxygenated blood to different parts of the body, right? Now, from the base of aorta rises the coronary artery, which supplies blood to the heart tissue. This is the coronary artery. The coronary artery forms a network of capillaries over the heart muscles. So let's just go through the ventral view again, guys. Now, when we see the ventral view of the human heart, what are the various things that we see? The human heart is made up of 4 chambers. It is made up of 2 small thin-walled chambers called as the atria. This is the right auricle, and you have the left auricle that will be on the other side. Okay. Then you have you also have 2 large thick-walled chambers called as the ventricles. Right, here are your 2 ventricles. Fine. Now, in between the 2 atria lies the pulmonary artery, which arises from the right ventricle. This is your pulmonary artery coming out from the right ventricle. Fine. The pulmonary artery, as you can see in the diagram, bifurcates into 2 pulmonary arteries. This is actually called as the pulmonary aorta, which bifurcates into 2 pulmonary arteries, which carry deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the right and the left lungs. So from here, this is the pulmonary aorta, which is bifurcating into 2, which will carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Right? Now, from the left ventricle arises the aorta. Here is the left ventricle. From here, you have the aorta coming out. Right? Now, from the left ventricle arises aorta, which runs anteriorly initially and then turns posteriorly to supply oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. Right? From the base of the aorta, here is your base of aorta. Right? From the base of aorta arises the coronary arteries. This is your coronary arteries. Here you can see this, right, which supplies blood to the heart tissue. The coronary arteries form a network of capillaries over the heart muscles. Fine, do we get this thing here? So do we understand the ventral view of the human heart? Right, let's just write this down, people. Ventral view. I can say that the human heart consists of 4 chambers. The human heart consists of 4 chambers. The human heart consists of 4 chambers, 2 small thin-walled chambers called atria. That's the plural, singular, called atria. Then and 2 large thick-walled chambers are called ventricles. Right? Now, in between the 2 atria lies the pulmonary aorta. In between the 2 atria lies the pulmonary aorta, which arises from the right ventricle. Arises from the right ventricle. Fine. The pulmonary aorta bifurcates into two pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary aorta bifurcates into two pulmonary arteries. To carry deoxygenated blood. From right ventricles to the right and the left lungs. Fine, do we get this in here? Next, from the left ventricle arises the aorta. From the left ventricle arises the aorta, which runs posteriorly which runs anteriorly first, and turns posteriorly, to supply oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. Fine. Now, from the base of the aorta arises the coronary artery. From the base of aorta arises the coronary artery, which supplies blood to the heart tissues. Right? The coronary artery forms a network of capillaries over the heart muscles. The coronary arteries forms a network of capillaries over the heart muscle. Finally, get this in here. So this was the ventral view of the heart. Let's see the dorsal view of the heart, guys. First, let's write that down. Dorsal view. human heart. Let's see the dorsal view of the human heart. Now this is the dorsal view of the human heart, right? Now let's see what all can we see in this. Now the two major veins, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, open into the right auricle dorsally, right? This is your, you have, wait, I'll just show you this. Open into the right auricle dorsally. So you have the left pulmonary vein, right, that comes in there. You have 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs separately opening into the left auricle, right? You have the 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs which separately open into the left auricle. The coronary vein opens into the coronary sinus dorsal to the heart. This is your coronary sinus, right? The coronary vein opens into the coronary sinus, and your precaval, that's your superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, are going to go into the right auricle, and here you have the 4 pulmonary veins that come in to supply blood from the lungs to the human heart. Fine, do we get this thing clear? So that is my dorsal view of the human heart. Fine, let's write this down, guys. The two major veins called superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava open into the right auricle dorsally. Fine. Next, I can say that 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs separately open into the left auricle. 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs separately open into the left auricle. Fine. The coronary vein opens into the coronary sinus dorsal to the heart. Opens into the coronary sinus. The coronary vein opens into the coronary sinus dorsal to the heart. So that is the dorsal view of the human heart. Fine, do we get this thing here? Now besides that, let's try to understand the blood supply to the human to the heart muscle. Blood supply to the heart muscle. Blood supply to the heart muscles. Now, the heart muscles are supplied with oxygenated blood by a pair of coronary arteries. The heart muscles are supplied. The heart muscles are supplied with oxygenated blood blood by a pair of coronary arteries. Fine. These arteries arise from the left and the right aortic sinuses, which are the dilations of the walls of aorta ventral to the heart. You have the coronary sinus there. In the ventral view, I had shown you the coronary artery. So I can say that these arteries arise from the right and the left aortic sinuses, which are the dilations of the walls of aorta ventral to the heart. So the arteries that are supplying oxygenated blood to the heart arise from the right and the left aortic sinuses. Okay, the right and the left coronary arteries form a network of capillaries over the heart muscles to supply oxygenated blood to the heart. The right and the left coronary arteries, right and left coronary arteries form a network of capillaries over the heart muscle to supply oxygenated blood to the heart. Fine. The deoxygenated blood from the heart muscles is collected by the coronary vein, which opens into the coronary sinus dorsally. The coronary vein, we just saw the coronary sinus, and here is the coronary vein. Guys, can you see this? In the dorsal view, we can see this coronary vein, which is going to open into this coronary sinus. Fine. So I can say that the deoxygenated blood from the heart muscles are collected by coronary veins which open into the coronary sinus, dorsal to the heart. Fine. The coronary arteries supply oxygen and nutrients for the functioning of the heart. I can say that the coronary arteries supply oxygen and nutrients for the functioning of the heart. Right? Blockage of coronary artery causes blockage of coronary artery causes coronary thrombosis, which leads to heart attack. So that was my external view of the heart. Now let us try to see the internal view of the heart. Right? Let's try to see the internal view of the heart. Internal view of the heart. Your internal view of the heart. Okay, now let's try to understand the internal view of the heart. The internal view of the human heart has, you can see the four chambers, the two auricles and the two ventricles. The right and the left auricle are upper thin walled chambers, as we had already discussed this, and they are separated from each other by a muscular partition called as the interauricular septum. This here is your interauricular septum. Fine. They are the blood receiving chambers. Here is your superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, which brings deoxygenated blood from the body to the right auricle, and here are your pulmonary veins. Here are your pulmonary veins that bring oxygenated blood, two openings here and two openings here, the four openings of the pulmonary veins, which bring oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left auricle. Now let's try to see each one of them in detail. Let's first consider the right auricle. The right auricle has a sino-auricular aperture guarded by a sino-auricular valve. Right? The right auricle, as I already told you, receives deoxygenated blood through the sino-auricular aperture. Here you will have this sino-auricular aperture. That is your aperture that's your opening of your superior and inferior vena cava into the right auricle, right? So the right auricle receives deoxygenated blood through the sino-auricular aperture from the anterior and the posterior parts of the body through the superior and the inferior vena cava, right? The inferior vena cava has a valve and its opening to the right auricle. The coronary sinus pours venous blood from the heart muscles again into the right auricle. We just saw the coronary system, right? The coronary sinus has a thebasis valve at its opening. So you have these different valves that would open into the right auricle. Next, let's see the left auricle. This is your left auricle. The left auricle is slightly smaller than the right one. You have 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs opening into the left auricle. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are your 4 pulmonary veins. Thus, the left auricle receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. The right and the left auricles open into the right and the left ventricles through separate openings called as the auricular ventricular aperture. Here are those openings. Those are your auricular ventricular apertures. Fine. The right auricular ventricular aperture is between the right auricle and the right ventricle. Here it is. Right. And is guarded by a tricuspid valve having 3 cusps. Here you have this is your tricuspid valve, right? The left auricular ventricular aperture is between the left auricle and the left ventricle and is guarded by the bicuspid valve, which has 2 cusps. The tricuspid and the bicuspid valve are connected to the papillary muscles. I don't think the papillary muscles are shown. Here are the papillary muscles. These are those papillary muscles to which the bi and the tricuspid valves are connected. So the tri and the bicuspid valves are connected to the papillary muscles of the ventricles by means of a muscular cord called as chordate tendon. Here is your cord that connects the valves to the ventricles, right? Now let's move on to the ventricles. The right and the left ventricle are the lower thick-walled chambers of the heart. Here you can see that these are your thick-walled chambers of the heart. The walls of the ventricle are thrown into the papillary muscles, which are connected to the tri and the bicuspid valve by a muscular cord called as chordate tendon. Here, this opens into this muscles, and the tri and the bicuspid valves are connected by a muscular cord which is called as chordate tendon. Fine. The right and the left ventricles are separated by a muscular partition called as the interventricular septum. So this here is your interventricular septum. The right ventricle gives off pulmonary aorta. Here is your right ventricle which gives out pulmonary aorta. Here is your pulmonary aorta coming out from here, right? While the left ventricle gives off systemic aorta. Left ventricle, this is your systemic aorta which is going to run anteriorly and then turns posteriorly, right? The openings of the pulmonary and the systemic aorta are guarded by the semilunar valves. So you would have valve here and you would have a valve here. These are called as the semilunar valves. The right and the left ventricles are the blood distribution chambers. Fine, do we get this in here? So do we understand the internal view of the heart? Fine. Let's write the internal view of the heart first. Human heart has 4 chambers. It has 4 chambers, 2 auricles and 2 ventricles. Right? Now, auricles. The right and the left auricle are the upper thin-walled chambers. The right and left auricles are the upper thin-walled chambers. Thin-walled chambers. They are separated from each other by a muscular partition. They are separated from each other by a muscular partition called Interauricular Septum. Interauricular Septum. Fine. They are the blood receiving chambers. They are blood receiving chambers. So those are your auricles. Then you have, let's see in detail, the right auricle. Now, the right auricle has sino-auricular apparature. Has sino-auricular apparature. Has sino-auricular apparature guarded by a sino-auricular valve. Fine. The right auricle receives deoxygenated blood. The right auricle receives deoxygenated blood. The right auricle receives deoxygenated blood through sino-auricular apparature. Through sino-auricular apparature. From the anterior and the posterior parts of the body. From the anterior and posterior parts of the body through superior and inferior vena cava. Fine. The inferior vena cava has a S-shaped valve. The inferior vena cava has an S-shaped valve at its opening to right auricle. At its opening to right auricle. Right? The coronary sinus pours venous blood. Sinus pours venous blood from the heart muscles into the right auricle. Right? The coronary sinus has a sebaceous valve at its opening. that's your right auricle. Now let's check the left auricle. The left auricle is slightly smaller than the right one. Smaller than the left one. Right? 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs open into the left auricle. Pulmonary veins. 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs open into the left auricle. Right? Thus the left auricle receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. Thus left auricle receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. Fine. The right and the left auricles open into the right and the left ventricles through separate openings. So that was your left auricle. I can say that the right and left auricles open into right and left ventricles. Right and left ventricles through separate openings. Called auricular ventricular apparature. Right? Now, the right auricular ventricular apparature. The right auricular ventricular apparature is between the right auricle and the right ventricle. Is between right auricle and right ventricle. Right auricle and right ventricle, and is guarded by tricuspid valve. And is guarded by tricuspid valve having 3 cusps. Right? That was your right auricular ventricular apparature. The left auricular ventricular apparature the left auricular ventricular apparature is between left auricle and left ventricle. Is between left auricle and left ventricle. Is between left auricle and left ventricle, and is guarded by bicuspid valve is guarded by bicuspid valve, or which is also called the mitral valve, with two cusps. Right? The tri and the bicuspid valves, tricuspid and bicuspid valves are connected with papillary muscles of the ventricles by means of muscular cord called chordae tendon. Fine. So that's your auricles. Let's move on to the ventricles, guys. Now, ventricles. The right and the left ventricle are the lower thick-walled chambers of the heart. Right and left ventricles are the lower thick-walled chambers of the heart. Fine. The walls of the ventricle are thrown into papillary muscles. The walls of ventricles are thrown into papillary muscles. Which are connected to tricuspid and bicuspid valve, which are connected to tricuspid and bicuspid valve, which are connected to tricuspid and bicuspid valves by means of muscular cord, by means of muscular cords called chordae tendineae. Right? The right and the left ventricles are separated by a muscular partition called the right and left ventricles are separated by a muscular partition called interventricular septum. Fine. The right ventricle gives off pulmonary aorta. The right ventricle gives off pulmonary aorta, and the left ventricle gives off systemic aorta. And the left ventricle gives off systemic aorta. Fine. The openings of the pulmonary and the systemic aorta are guarded by the openings now are guarded by semilunar walls. Fine. The right and the left ventricles are the blood distribution chambers. The right and left ventricles are the blood distribution chambers. Right? So that's my internal structure of the human heart. Right? Okay, we'll stop this here for the day. Thank you very much.